"Order!" called the tall, horned Vice-Chancellor Masamada. He slammed his staff of office into the ground of his platform, sending resounding echoes through the massive, cacophonous chamber which held the Galactic Senate. But the effect of even this normally effective display was muted, nearly ignored. "Order! We will have order!" he demanded. "Order?" called Vidaz Amutweth from his hovering platform. "How can you demand order while insisting on this chaos?" Many others cheered and called out agreements to his sentiments, a chorus of dissent. Masamada's face fogged with rage, and he made to slam down his staff again, but a raised hand from Palpatine was enough to defuse him. The man looked at the side of his leader's head, and Palpatine nodded without looking at him. Recognizing and addressing the senator representing Saresh and the Vensensor sector, Mas called out. Palpatine stepped forward, raising both hands in a calming gesture. "Fellows, please! I'm sure we can resolve this alarm without devolving into exaggerations. I assure you—" "Exaggerations!" Vidaz screamed. "You've already recalled nearly everything, nearly every asset, back to Coruscant. The Outer Rim sieges are folding like Pazak chips, all but lost. Saresh is being overtaken as we speak by General Grievous's forces, and the Saresh Defense Force is fighting a battle that they cannot win, and we are abandoning them to their fate." Palpatine kept a serene composure as he reached out with his mind, floundering the upstart Vidaz and creating a gap in his tirade to speak through, though it was not he who spoke. He had learned that it was best to allow others to be the voice of rebuke when speaking among quote-unquote peers. "Is it a trait of your species to be unable to see what is in front of you, or is that you're failing alone?" crowed Senator Saam. "The entire Quadrive Yard defense fleet is in shambles. The defenders of Axum are mauled and defeated. Many Jedi are dead, and thousands of clone personnel along with them. This new enemy has departed from the Axum system, practically next door to Coruscant, and you are to risk defeat here in the very heart of the Republic to preserve your planet from a temporary separatist occupation." The Ishitib senator scoffed loudly, exaggerating his demonstration. "The only chaos in this Senate is coming from the short-sighted fools like you who cannot adapt to an evolving situation." "Evolving situation indeed," called Askak, the senator of Malastare. "Since when did we give the Supreme Chancellor the authority to recall so many of our forces?" he asked openly. That was not good, and Sheev stifled Askak, carefully measuring his power. Jedi, many Jedi, were present after all. They stood in the hallways and entrances into the chamber, slinking in the shadows and hovering behind their supporters. They felt nothing as he silenced the senator, again allowing another voice to speak where he himself might have had to. "Nonsense!" cried Senator Ister Paddy. "We have already bestowed the Chancellorship with all the power required to orchestrate the war decisively and at his discretion," the member of the Loyalist Committee asserted. "As a member of the Military Oversight Committee, I must disagree," said Senator Ang, speaking softly yet being heard through the use of the speakers built into his platform. Palpatine felt a spike of rage enter into him, and nearly reached out for the Runion, before realizing that Master Windu himself was seated in the alcove behind the senator. To stifle him, as he had the others, would risk too much, and he begrudgingly watched more of the Senate's power balance slip away from his design. "We have given the Supreme Chancellor all this power in regards to the war with the Separatists, but nothing about the briefings we have seen has hinted to me that these far outsiders are of any relation to the Separatists at all. Therefore, I think we need to take a vote to determine whether to include this newer conflict into his purview." "Order!" None of you have been recognized to speak. We will have order in this Senate, Masamada shouted, his staff banging like an oversized gavel. My friends, Palpatine said, beginning again. Surely you realize that this conflict must not be victim to indecision. Already I have put together a special task force to examine and advise on these outsiders, and as any of you would do, I am acting in accordance to their advice. But I must be allowed to act freely, or neither of these wars will end favorably, he said. He longed to use his powers openly, to bend these unruly Cretans to his will. But the time had not yet come, and the Jedi were not yet gone. So again, he controlled his expression, as countless voices rose in dissent to his words. So we are merely to continue extending your term and powers with every new war? That is unacceptable. We must vote, stated Senator Mon Mothma of Chandrila. Is this the same task force that suggested allying with the separatist animals? Why are you even heeding that kind of advice? Shrilled Senator Neb Creep, who pointed a crooked finger at Palpatine's pulpit. The words of the two senators caused the room to stir into a fresh frenzy, and Palpatine felt himself tested as he never had been before. The Senate had been in the palm of his hands only a few weeks ago, and now they were rolling out of his control. He needed to secure a temporary alliance with the Confederacy to crush the upstarts, a prospect he had hoped would be more palatable to the Senate after the Republic's recent losses. But again, he found his own effectiveness getting in the way of his plans. The Senate had been divided and polarized by design, to keep them weak beneath him, to make them unable to unify and resist him as he used his emergency powers to shape the cradle of his nascent empire. But what once had served as his protection was now a determined fetter, one he was not certain he could overcome in time. And to add fuel to the growing fire, Dooku was having an even harder time on his end. As the Republic pulled back, the Confederacy advanced, and none of the senators and interests of that side had any intention of backing down now that they were on the winning foot. All talk of an alliance with the Republic, even a temporary one, had been laughed out of what passed for a Senate among the Separatists, just as General Grievous delivered his report on his latest uncontested conquest. Sheev suspected, from what he sensed, that they were in for a rude awakening. But even if they did fall into line, it would be meaningless unless the Republic was willing to extend an olive branch. And after 4 years of stoking the flames of resentment and hatred, the would-be emperor now found the momentum which should have made his empire and plan all but inevitable was now the same force jeopardizing everything. The rage such a thing inspired within him nearly had the master of the dark side raising his voice as the many influences of the Senate struggled for the right to be heard. He made progress towards his cause, he always did, but not enough, not nearly enough. So had it been in all previous meetings, and, he sensed, so too would it be at all future meetings, until the threat was upon them. But the Jedi were already moving forward with their own plans. That Palpatine could sense keenly, and Anakin had suggested as much to him in their last meeting. And whatever it was they planned to do, their Dark Lord's machinations were also shifting. Perhaps the Republic could not be converted into an empire, not before it was eaten alive by these new outsiders. But that meant nothing more than a delay, for Sidious knew in his black heart of hearts that his empire was written into the stars. He would sit the throne of his galactic regime, even if it was a throne of corpses and ruin, instead of one fashioned from the broken body of the bowed and bent Republic. All things were shifting, but in this, Palpatine's faith and ambition were absolute. You are sure this is the planet? This is the system? Asked Orion. He stood straight and tall in his cataphractii armor, looking down upon the world they were orbiting from the massive viewing window of the second bridge. The planet glowed like a massive star, the thick waves of slightly off-color sand crossing its surface, making it resemble a massive divine tiger's eye. The round man beside him shuffled slightly at the question, spider-like legs clicking and skittering automatically to compensate for his weight.
Yes, my lord. The system is the most analogous to the Sol system in 64 of our 483 spatial position tests. While that may not seem very similar to you, my lord, it is actually an astonishingly abnormally high amount of correlation when one also factors in the distinct shape and abnormal stellar geography of this whole galaxy, said the head astrogator.
Orion nodded slowly. And you are sure that it is habitable? He asked, a bit more skeptically this time. The large, augmented man flapped his head in an emphatic nod.
Yes, the oxygen level is well within Imperial tolerance ratings. The planet is rich in moisture at high altitudes. Our instrumentation indicates to us that the planet was subject to a manual exterminatus some tens of thousands of years ago, which is why the oceans have all vapolithified into the atmosphere. We suspect it is that, paired with the silica content of the sands, which is causing the planet to glow as much as it does. And the scions of the Adeptus Mechanicus have been proving most compliant with our requests.
Again, Orion nodded, not looking away. Air and water. Will that be enough? The old space marine muttered.
Oh, of course it will be, Master Phaetris. Our hydroponics and vat farms are run-of-the-mill technologies, long mastered by the tech priests of all the worlds we have adopted into the fold. You are not condemning them, my lord. You are giving them a great honor.
He was far from familiar enough to reach out and lay a hand upon Orion's shoulder, but the chapter master felt the sentiment and smiled, though only slightly. They had trillions of people to safeguard, and most of their ships could only make calculated jumps as opposed to the piloted jumps of the Navy ships. They needed to unencumber themselves, and they needed to do it fast.
What you said to the tempered hands was wise,
the astrogator added.
Only the best half of those we have brought can follow. For the others, this is more mercy than even the Emperor would show. Here, they will have a chance. Their supplies will last them until they can finish construction of their water towers, and everything else will naturally flow from there.
These words curdled the small amount of comfort the astrogator had imparted onto Orion, for he knew those words to be only technically true. If the settlers found their way to a proper location quickly, if nothing delayed their construction, and no disaster of any kind struck, then maybe the supplies they had would be enough. But unless the Emperor truly was a god, and truly did bless these people, there wasn't a chance of that happening in Orion's clear mind. He saw several black dots suddenly contrast against the shine of the planet, and he felt his gut clench at the sight. The first transports, carrying those colonists he and the others among his slowly growing government had judged to be non-essential as both labor and skill. It would take a miracle to preserve them, but with well-worn discipline, he stiffened his jaw and hardened himself as he had done countless times. Mankind must suffer so that mankind may survive, the ancient warrior king muttered.
What was that, Lord?
The astrogator asked. Nothing. Well done, Cervantes. I commend your work and your skill. Now please, leave me. I desire to reflect. Cervantes bowed low with the aid of his spider-like servo limbs and exited the room in short order. Orion remained, gazing out upon the enormity of his civilian fleet, watching nearly half of it descending onto a barren planet. It was upon thoughts of inevitable death that he was dwelling when he noticed the intruder. Though he could not hear whatever it was, nor see it, nor directly smell it, Orion suspected they had entered through a vent in the aft side of the empty secondary bridge. His guards stood outside the room, watching the entrance, but for all intents and purposes, the intruder had found him alone. It made its way across the room from the corner towards him at the far center. Utterly silent, but Orion could still smell it. Or rather, Orion could very distinctly smell where the intruder had been. While the hidden thing which approached him had no smell of its own, the coolant pipes it had squeezed through, the rancid home cooking which had blown over it as it crossed through the ventilation shafts, and even the particular tang of the rust which still adhered to the tips of its fingers, all served to give it away. Additionally, he also suspected he knew who the silent intruder represented. It reached a distance 6 feet behind him, at which point the chapter master chose to turn languidly around. Orion was unafraid of attack. No single strike could slay him while he wore his most holy and potent vestment. What he found waiting for him confirmed his suspicions, and he felt his brow crease. No figure, man or otherwise, stood waiting for him there. Instead, upon the ground lay a sealed note stamped in red wax. It was tied to an object via a thin silver cord. Orion recognized it after a moment, a syringe-like device made to imitate the corrupting organ of a gene stealer. It was partially deformed by exposure to extreme heat, but certainly still recognizable, as was the stylized eye which adorned the red wax which had been stamped onto the note. The Inquisition. Never before had Orion desired an assassination attempt over the message that had been delivered in its place. He did not even need to open the note and read it to know what message it contained. The Inquisition was here, had been here, among his fleet, all along. They knew what he had done, what he had ordered the Skyward to do, and they wanted to use that information as leverage against him. The chapter master grit his teeth, but showed little of it. He bent and, with precision born of mastercraft, he picked up the letter and syringe. A new, infinitely more dangerous player had just entered the game, and they had a hand which could wipe the table of all of Orion's machinations. But the fact that they hadn't, that they had sought him as a pawn or as a partner, spoke as loudly as any implied threat of exposure. Orion felt a fire kindle in his stomach at that, and a fierceness took his expression as he exited the room, something neither of his guards failed to realize. "Master, are you well?" asked Nelos. Orion smiled at the man, a visage which nearly stunned the veteran, who, after a brief pause, smiled in response. "A challenge, then?" Orion nodded, his smile broadening into a toothy, predatory grin that was common on many Marines, but rare for the chapter master. Thus far he had played the role of a shepherd, though, in truth, he was a sheepdog by nature, and he had just caught the scent of a wolf. Mace was shrouded by his robe, wearing his hood up, his arms folded beneath the heavy sleeves of his garb. But though his eyes were hidden, they remained fixed on the Supreme Chancellor, watching with a silent intensity as the Jedi Master lingered in the alcove behind the Runian Senator's currently fixed platform. He did not blink, and did not watch with only his eyes. Despite this being the very heart of the Republic, Mace had long sensed a hidden darkness here. At first, he had thought it to be a general sense of the flow of things, but the more and more he moved to and from Coruscant, the more certain he became that this pall of shadow was something more local than he had first guessed. The dark side was everywhere, strengthening despite the efforts of his order and the many sacrifices they had made for the Republic. Meanwhile, the Chancellor's vice grip over power in the Republic only grew more and more entrenched. The courts had been slowly but surely filled with his supporters, and while they railed against him now, the Senate was largely in his favor when it came to the handling of the war. And now, with this new threat, yet another opportunity was being presented before Palpatine, one which he could leverage to gain even more power, not just in the Clone War, but in all wars. He questioned again whether or not he was making a mistake by going along with Anakin's plan. Would the Order's actions save the Republic, or thrust it further into the hands of the Supreme Chancellor? Mace was not sure, but he put the thoughts aside as he felt a light touch on his shoulder. "It is time," the hooded Padawan said. Mace nodded, turning and leaving his place to be occupied by the messenger as he departed to meet with the others. He took a speeder back to the temple, and from there flew his starfighter up to one of the many orbiting Golan defense platforms which guarded Coruscant. He docked and dismounted his craft, going to the preordained place, Shuttle Bay 66. He kept his hood up as he moved through the station, showing his credentials to the droid attendant who approached him and entering the bay. The place was packed with refugees from Axum and Anaxis, those who had managed to escape before the outsiders had managed to enclose the system completely. A surprisingly large amount of civilians had managed to escape, but even so, that only meant that the refugee crisis which was now developing was only becoming more and more exacerbated. Nearly every single bay on this entire station, and many other stations besides, were packed even more densely than this one. There were easily 5,000 in this room alone, and Mace stepped carefully as he moved around huddled, shrouded forms, makeshift campfires, and rough temporary dwellings. He found the exact place in moments, his unnaturally keen eyes locating the sign above the maintenance door, drawn in white chalk against the dull silver of the bay walls. The spread wings of the Order. He moved there, knocked twice, and entered. Within the confines of the abandoned maintenance room leaned and stood the robed and hooded figures of Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, Master Quinlan Vos, Master Shaak Ti, Master Plo Koon, and Forder Padawan Ahsoka Tano. The center of the dimly lit room had been cleared of everything but a wide table, on which sat two holo-imagers, each one projecting their own holograms. One was of the planet Axum, the sphere rotating slowly, with several points across its surface highlighted prominently. The other was a figure, a Weequay male dressed in the recognizable motley of a pirate. Windu frowned, but said nothing as he approached. "Took a lot to get this, let me tell you, and it was not cheap. No, lost more men on this than I did trying to kidnap the Ikani princess a few years back," the pirate was saying. I know, and we're thankful, Hondo," said Ahsoka. "Thankful? Oh, you better be more than thankful!" the pirate snapped. "You will be properly compensated for your services to us. I will make sure of that," said Shaak Ti, who loomed behind Ahsoka, her hood also raised. Well, as long as the Jedi in the room says so, I know how honest you tend to be, he said with a laugh. Of course, Mace Windu interjected. What we offer you will be entirely contingent on how useful what you have to offer us turns out to be. So, for both our sakes, I hope whatever it is you have to show us is worth it. The little hologram turned to regard him hatefully. Oh, you trust me, it's worth it. Mace nodded. Then why don't you go ahead and show us? Hondo seemed to step back and looked around. Aren't we still waiting for Skywalker? The pirate asked. Mace looked around, his eyes finding Obi-Wan. The armored Jedi shrugged, his face suggesting chagrin. Mace shook his head. Anakin was late to his own meeting. Proceed. We will brief him when he arrives, Mace said. Hondo squinted at him and withdrew a datapad from his ensemble. He tapped away at it a few times before stowing it again. Okay, now that that's out of the way, he said, pressing a button on his wrist. The globe, which represented Axum, glowed and expanded. We managed to ping a whole mess of targets for you. The smugglers have been having a field day. The new Imperial Authority is still completely clueless as to how hyperdrives work, and they don't seem to understand that small ships can still carry them. That being said, they are lethal, and they shoot first and ask questions never. He pressed another button on his wrist, and the globe spun and zoomed into a particular location. Displayed before them was a city, Azure City, a massive district in the urbanized landscape of Axum, and one of the wealthiest. In the center of the image was a pyramidal, flat-topped building which was clearly of a different architecture than the city surrounding it, made of stone braced with blackened iron in place of the gleaming steel of the buildings around it. It bore stacks upon stacks of gun emplacements, and already was adorned with many skull and angel-themed depictions. This is one of the many fortresses that the outsiders have been building around the planet, said Hondo. It's only been a few weeks, and they've already built this much, asked Master Plo. The pirate nodded. They appear to deploy most of their buildings from space, mostly assembled before it even touches down. Then they drop in these big boxes and pods, and when they land, the workers on the ground put them all together. And let me tell you something, these outsiders, they don't take breaks. They have cyborg slaves or something similar, and those freaks never stop working. It only takes them hours to start adding the skulls. As interesting as their work ethic might be, I gotta ask where this is going. You said they are putting these bunkers up all over the planet. So, I guess my question is, what makes this one so special? Hondo smirked, shoulders rising in an internal wave of self-aggrandizement that Windu could feel, even standing light years away. Well, my perceptive Jedi employer, the special thing about this base is that I am 90% sure that this one is the main one. And by that, you know that I mean the one from which all coordination from around the planet is directed. Mace rubbed his chin. Interesting. What leads you to believe that? The Jedi Master asked. We have been intercepting their radio communications. After Anakin gave us the translation matrix for their language, it was not a problem to start figuring them out. Like I said, unless this is a very convincing misdirection, and I don't think that it is, this is the main place. Take this place out, and you decapitate their planet-wide CNC. That's a good start, murmured Obi-Wan. But even getting that far won't be easy. What do we know about their orbital defenses? He asked. Well, not much. But that's half because we know next to nothing about how their ships work, and half because there isn't much to know, said the pirate. Explain, Mace insisted. They only left 3 ships behind. Well, 4 really. One of the big ones, about 5 kilometers long, and 2 of the smaller ones. You know, the ones that only dwarf your ships by double the size. And the 4th ship? Asked Ahsoka. It's a Providence-class dreadnought. I think it was Admiral Trench's flagship before Anaxus got left to the outsiders. It's docked and secured to the side of one of the smaller ships. I have no idea what they're doing with it. Mace's eyes snapped up at that, and he found the gaze of Master Obi-Wan already directed toward himself. "The bomb!" they both said, eyes widening in realization and shock. "Bomb?" Hondo asked, but the two Jedi shook their heads. "Best not discuss that here now, but we will need to take care of that ship first, before anything else," Obi-Wan said. Hondo shrugged at that. "If you ask me, 3 ships should be too few to withstand the Republic's fleet, but I heard they took next to no losses at Pazab, so maybe it isn't enough? I don't know, but what I do know is that from their initial invasion of Axum, we can easily see that they never shrink away from a good old-fashioned orbital bombardment. If you plan to fight on the surface, I'd make sure they were tied up just to be safe," he suggested. "We will do even better," said Mace. "We will show them that their technology and strategy are pointless in the face of the Force." Several of the other masters were nodding at this. A few even smiled. "And, how are you planning on doing that?" asked the pirate. Then it hit him, and his wrinkled face stretched into an unfriendly grin. "You're going to board them, aren't you?" Mace said nothing, not denying the statement. "Well, if you were, I may have some special merchandise that could help you with that." "And just what would that merch be, Hondo?" Ahsoka asked, arms crossed, but a bemused smile playing across her lips. "Oh, just some modified space rocks a couple of Verpine friends of mine were looking to get rid of. I could sell them to you for cheap, as long as you don't mind my knocks." Ahsoka smirked and looked at the others, who gave her their opinions without speaking a word aloud. "We will talk about that after this meeting, but they need to be made available fast, Hondo, or no deal, no matter how cheap," she said. "But of course! If you were to pay this very second, I could have them in your possession immediately, and not that I'm trying to rush your purchase, or—" the pirate started. "Moving on. Once we neutralize their fleet in orbit, we will be limited in the number of objectives we can strike and neutralize. I think we are all in agreement that this main bunker must be disabled and placed under our control. That being said, I do believe we will have the numbers to engage in one more objective. What do you have in that regard?" said Mace. "Well," the pirate said hesitantly, "only 2 worth considering, in my humble opinion," he said, pressing a button on his wrist and causing the hologram to shift, changing to the view of a massive, shining temple made in the style of the Outsiders. It appeared only half finished, but its central mass was mostly complete, and gold and silver filigree were being added along with statues and ornaments of the kind the Outsiders are being more and more known for. "They've got something shiny and important hidden away in there," said the pirate. "According to some of the people on the inside, they had an altar there first, with some big thing placed there, but no one was allowed too close to it. Over time, the altar became a chapel, and then a church, and, well, as you can see, more and more. Now it's basically a fortress, and it is almost as heavily guarded as the main fortress from before." "So, what do you think they've gotten there?" Voss asked. The scoundrel shrugged his holographic shoulders. "I have no idea, but whatever it is, it's important. Even if it is just some religious artifact, it could be worth more than the planet itself to seize it and use it against them, at least to bargain with in the future. My inner pirate cannot look upon such an obvious mark and not, well, mark it." "And what else did you find?" asked Shakti. At this question, Hondo did seem to sober. "You told me I was dealing with human supremacists. I never heard of the Pies Dia before, but then again, I'd never been one for history books, but I did my research before I sent my people in, and it did not prepare me for what they were doing." He pressed another button, and the hologram shifted to a compound. Every face darkened, and a few even gasped, as the view panned and moved closer to reveal what was happening. The camps were full, with mostly aliens, though some humans could also be seen. The image changed, moving between scenes of the inside and outside of the horrid place. Men, women, and children were enslaved. They were being tortured, abused in every way a mind might conceive, starved, forced to work in fetters, humiliated and scorned by the unrestrained cruelty and depravity of their jailers. These compounds were not just alien internment camps, they were all-purpose death camps. This is just one location of hundreds. I haven't really been able to notice if any one is larger than the others, since the occupancy rates fluctuate so much, but anyone who speaks out against the occupiers gets caught committing crimes against them, or if they're simply not human, they get sent to one of these. "We have to stop this!" Ahsoka said, slamming her hands down on the table, eyes sickeningly fixed on the abject cruelty on display before them. Mace nodded. What is the point behind this? Are they drawing power from this somehow? Firing squads, living mass graves, forced labor, gas chambers, death by dropping, death by mass drowning. It was almost as if the outsiders were themselves desperate in the execution of their nihilistic genocides. The only saving grace in all of this was that Anaxis and Axum were, by and large, human-dominated worlds. Watching the murder go on, Ahsoka realized that if this had not been the case, they may have chosen to simply ruin the planet from orbit in place of this horrific occupation. "There isn't any," Hondo said, a note of depression edging his normally chipper or indifferent tone. "They don't even bother to appropriate their possessions before killing them most of the time. They burn or bury you with everything you had on your person. Wasteful! Not to mention cruel, terrible, and unspeakably evil," he said, adding in the last bit when Ahsoka shifted her glare from the hologram to him. "You have to understand, I am not the most reputable businessman myself. Naturally, I have a high tolerance for the unscrupulous, but even for a man like me, this is in every way inexcusable. It is not even understandable. If they were not dedicating so much manpower to doing this, we probably would not have been able to get nearly so much information as we did." Mace nodded again as the hologram shifted from a depiction of the horrid axe to the crest and symbol of the Crimson Razors. "Give us the location of all of these sites. After we have liberated Axum, our first point of order will be to free these people as quickly as possible," he said. "Except for the camp we're going to liberate during our initial attack, right?" Ahsoka asked, turning to face the Jedi Master. He narrowed his eyes at her impertinent glare and shook his head. "We cannot prioritize the liberation of any single one of these camps over our struggle with the new Pius Dia. If that temple contains something they revere, then it will save billions if there is any way we can use it as leverage, to say nothing of what it could teach us about them while it is in our possession." That's outrageous," Ahsoka said. "The temple will still be there when the fighting is done. You can have your prize then," she contended. "We do not know that. It would not surprise me at all if all these radical Dia members chose to destroy their own sacred artifact before allowing it to fall into our hands," Mace countered. "He does have a point," Hondo's hologram added from the table. "Intercepted messages have at least hinted to us that if the planet's defenses fall, they intend to detonate this structure to keep you from, desecrating their holy gains. That is part of the reason I mentioned it first." The Jedi Master nodded his head towards the pirate. "Precisely. We must seize it before they realize the battle is lost. That will be the only way to ensure we obtain it, and whatever it represents. Besides, these camps will certainly remain after the battle, so I'd suggest you heed your own words." The former Jedi grit her teeth. "But the people in those camps won't be," she hissed. "This is not up for discussion," he hissed back. "With all due respect, Master, you are being ridiculous. We are the Jedi. We shouldn't prioritize," she started. "We are the Jedi," Mace corrected. "You are a concerned and appreciated citizen of this republic, but you are not a member of this order or of this council," he said. Ahsoka grit her teeth even harder, hands clutching at her sides, but she said nothing. Instead, she took a breath exhaled, and began to walk towards the door. Well, since I'm not part of this order, I suppose I shouldn't be party to its decisions, she said, pressing the access button to the side of the door and making to leave. Ahsoka, Shaak Ti started to say, but a raised hand from Windu paused her, and the former Padawan walked out. Before the door could close, however, two more robed figures ducked in. One pulled back her hood to reveal the puzzled face of Jedi Master Aayla Secura. What was that about? She asked as she and the other came closer. A difference of tactical opinion, Mace said dismissively as he turned to fully face the new arrivals. He gave Secura a smile and a nod before looking to the one who stood beside her. Whoever he was no Jedi. That much Windu could sense. And you are? He asked. The clone pulled back his hood with a stern but friendly expression. We've met before, General, he said. Commander Bly, Mace said, genuinely surprised. I certainly was not expecting your involvement in our order's less, official actions. Bly stepped forward, standing nearer to Windu, and rubbed his own chin as he seemed to take on a posture of intense consideration. Correct me if I'm wrong, General, but does this less-than-official action involve invading Axum ahead of the Republic vote in order to force a dedicated, proper counterattack on these religious zealots we are letting run rampant? Windu blinked. Well, in a word, yes, he said. Commander Bly smiled. Well, what a coincidence then. It just so happens that I have a particular fondness for invading, counterattacks, and I have never had the privilege of visiting Axum before. Now I won't have to after the war. The Jedi cracked a smile and clasped the clone on the shoulder. Then it is good to have you with us. I just hope you can keep up. By myself, sir? Not a chance. But luckily, I won't be on my own, the clone said. The entire 327th are willing to join our cause, Aayla said. Mace rubbed his chin. Commander, you understand that you are risking a court-martial by doing this. You and all your men. We are not acting in our capacity as generals of the Republic, but in our role as Jedi Knights. You are not Jedi, and this could be seen as desertion, or worse. The commander's face stiffened, but he nodded. I understand, sir, and I assure you, I would rather face 1,000 court-martials before letting my general go into battle without her army, especially if it is to drive out invaders. I know where my loyalties lie, and I am, as I have always been, a soldier of the Grand Army of the Republic. All my men are. Windu gave him a sharp nod. Then I'll question it no further, though I cannot promise that Anakin will approve of this alteration to his plan. What alterations? All turned at the voice, seeing two more robed figures enter the room. Anakin drew back his hood to reveal himself, face branded with his customary cocky smile. Commander Bly and the 327th Star Corps have just, Master Obi-Wan started to say, though his voice trailed off as the second figure drew back his hood. Shaak Ti shook her head, bemused, while Voss chuckled despite himself, and Plo tilted his visored face. Captain Rex, Mace Windu said. Can I assume that this explains your lateness, young Skywalker? And can I go further and assume the whole 501st will be joining us as well? Anakin's grin grew wider. Nothing gets past you, Master Windu. Where's Ahsoka? I thought she would be here. She is waiting with the others in the bay outside, Windu said. Well then, what are we waiting for? Let's get out there! We are in the middle of devising our plan, Anakin. Do you want us to fill you in? Obi-Wan asked. No need, said Anakin, raising his hand to show off a hollow displayer disc he was holding. I've been having Hondo send me the meeting while we moved to get here. It seems pretty clear to me what we should do, he said. Windu gestured towards the table. This is your plan. By all means, inform us. Hondo, get those space rocks of yours here ASAP. We're going to need them. Also, you know those assault pods you use to board ships? We're going to need all of them. The pirate nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, sure, but I expect to be paid in full. Anakin then turned to Master Windu. Their strongest force will be stationed on their largest ship, which will need to be neutralized. That I will leave to you and Master Obi-Wan. Meanwhile, I will take the 501st back to Trench's flagship and finish what we started. We will neutralize the bomb and make sure it cannot be used, at least not remotely. He then turned to Master Voss and Aayla. Master Quinlan Voss, you will be given the main force going to the ground. You are the most familiar with urban infiltration and assault, so we will be depending on you to take their main bunker. Voss smiled, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, eyes alight. Groovy. Master Ayla Sakura, you will take the 327th and capture the temple simultaneously. Ayla nodded, standing straight and determined beside her trusted commander, who saluted as she answered. We can do this.
What about the last ship?
Asked Master Plo Koon. That's where you come in, Master Plo. You and a detachment of pilots will engage them in starfighters. It's just one ship, and you will be flying with other Jedi. But if it does turn out to be too much, retreat back to Coruscant and get help. We will figure something out to hold off while you get back. The Jedi Master seemed to think for a moment before nodding. Very well. Okay, let's go. I'll fill you all in on everything else on the way, Anakin said, turning back around towards the door. What's the rush, Skywalker? Mace asked, coming to stand beside him. The impetuous Jedi Knight grinned fiercely. The word just came in, a few minutes before I arrived, he said. Mace lifted an eyebrow. Then, Mace ventured. Anakin nodded. The Separatists just started pulling back all their forces, abandoning their weeks of gains. The Piasdia have reached their borders, and they are likely learning some hard lessons even as we speak. Now is the perfect time to strike. Both our enemies are distracted with each other. We can retake Anaxes and Axum in hours if we strike now. Mace nodded, eager to be on with it, though subconsciously grateful that Master Yoda would be staying behind to guard and watch over most of the Order's Padawans and Jedi of lesser rank. Yet, as Anakin stepped out into the crowded bay and leapt atop a tall stack of crates, Windu could not help but feel optimistic about their chances. Anakin drew his saber and raised it high, activating it. The act was like the lighting of a beacon, and in response, nearly 5,000 hidden Jedi tossed off their disguises and lifted their own sabers in answer. For Master Mundi! For Axum and Anaxes! For the Republic! He called. For the Republic! Answered the unified might of the Jedi Knights of the Republic, guardians of this galaxy for over 24,000 years, and now prepared for war in such a manner as had never been seen since the days of Ruusan. The Chosen One smiled. He would give them victory. Even if it meant death, he would give the Republic its victory. Hey there, loyal listeners. This is a fan with too much time. Here again at the end of the video to talk a little more about the Zektek sector. And this time we're going to talk a little bit about the forces, like the command forces within the Zektek sector, because there have been three big antagonistic influences that have shaped almost everything inside of that sector, and they have indirectly shaped basically the Imperial forces you're going to have in the example of Star Wars versus 40K. So it'll be a little bit, I hope at least, that you'll find it a little bit interesting as I tell you about how the commanders and the Imperial Navy in particular were shaped by the history of the sector. So, to get this off real quick, the three big antagonistic forces that have faced the sector are the Terrafont Entente, the Orcs, especially after the War of the Beast, and the Tyranids. The oldest commanders in the Zek-Tek sector, the ones that are hovering, are anywhere between 250 to 500 years old. They will remember and have been trained on fighting the remnants of the Terrafont Entente. And they're not going to be nearly as powerful and as crazy as they were back in their prime. But the things that you need to know about the Terrafont Entente is this. At no point are they really superior to the Imperium in any one given category. However, unlike the Tau, which is another very large conglomeration of multiple alien species conceivably working together, the Tau sort of technologically dominate the other species in their union, where it comes to be that Tau technology is generally speaking so superior to everyone else's that the Tau just sort of come in and give it away, and everybody just throws their stuff away and takes up some Tau stuff. This isn't always the case, but this tends to be the case. So, the Terrafont Entente were not like this. The race that dominated the other races among the Terrafont Entente did so because of a very powerful psychic ability that they had. But this psychic ability did not turn the other races into just brainless puppets, nor did they want them to be brainless puppets, because combining their technologies together turned out to be one of the very few ways that they could actually reap victories against the Imperium. And that was the big way by which the Terrafont Entente engaged in battle, surprising the enemy with some form of crazy, weird, unintuitive technology that the Imperium just wouldn't be able to foresee. Because of this, the commanders, the oldest commanders in the Zek-Tek sector, are very, very cautious and extremely suspicious of their enemy. They expect their enemy to be able to do virtually anything at any time, but they don't expect them to be superior to them in the field. They haven't really fought a lot of chaos in the Zek-Tek sector. They haven't, like, there have been heresies and there have been some chaos outbreaks, but as an example, Traitor Astartes have been almost unheard of in the whole history of the Zek-Tek sector. Even during the Horus Heresy, Traitor Astartes did not show up in the Zek-Tek sector because it was sealed up and off at the time. So, just as a result of that, they're not really used to fighting in forces which are the sum or equal to them in the ways that they consider themselves to be superior. The very few times they've been challenged in that way is with the Orcs during the War of the Beast, kind of, and with the Tyranids, kind of, but as I'm sure you know if you know Warhammer 40k lore, an Orc is not the match of a Space Marine, and the Tyranids are different enough that you don't really... They're their own nightmare. They're very weird. But in any case, the point is just this. The oldest commanders of the sector are very used to fighting against unpredictable, extremely wily, tricky, ambushy, like you can't predict what they're going to do aliens, but not against forces which are super straightforward and able to match them conventionally toe for toe, tit for tat. And that's the oldest commanders in this sector. The mid-aged commanders, and by mid-aged I don't mean like normal human mid-age, I mean like between the ages of 80 and 100 or more, somewhere out there, 80 and, let's say 80 and 200. Those commanders are raised mostly on fighting orcs. Everybody in the Zek-Tek sector fights orcs, but orcs were a bigger problem for a little while, and if you weren't fighting the Terrafont Entente, you were fighting the orcs. And you guys know how orcs are. They're very straightforward. They're straight, very brutal. You just don't want to underestimate them, but as long as you know what you're dealing with orcs can become a routine. And then you have the commanders underneath that, which have dealt mostly with Tyrannid, Genestealer cults, and other insurrections and heresies for the most part. So yeah, clearly the older commanders dealt with a little bit of a more unconventional foe, and the younger commanders dealt with very conventional, well, with much more conventional situations as so far as the Imperium is used to dealing with. So, the Navy. This is where it gets kind of interesting. As the Terrafont declined through the 10,000 years that they've been fighting with the Imperium, the Navy ceased to receive support. The Terrafont began as an extremely high-level threat. Now they are virtually, if not completely, extinct. This has resulted in the Navy of the Zektek sector being a pretty well-sized Navy, but made up almost entirely of really, really, really old ships. I mean really old. Like, some of these ships were some of the ships that the Primarch left behind when he first discovered the Zektek sector and left some of his forces there to, like, hold and reinforce the area against the Terrafont. So, basically, if you're a Warhammer lore guy, you kind of know, or a lore person, you know that the older your ships are in the Warhammer 40k universe, the cooler stuff they can do, but also the less reliable they are. So these ships have some incredible old weapons and power systems on them that make them pretty unique in the Imperial Navy, but they're also prone to power outages, they're haunted, they don't have very good energy efficiency, some of them will short out if they use their main cannon twice or once, it really depends, you know. A lot of these ships end up doing in effect, they roll dice whenever they do anything. Like, oh, okay, we're gonna transfer the power from the lower decks to the shields to absorb this incoming blast. Let's just hope that doesn't turn everything off when we do it. And so they do it and just pray to the Omnissiah that the shields get stronger and don't just turn off. So it's an interesting fleet. The Zektek sector can make its own ships, but because of the War of the Beast, its ship production capacity has been greatly inhibited throughout the last 10,000 years. They used to be able to produce all kinds of ship classes. Now they constrain themselves to just cruisers, and even with cruisers, they don't really do full-sized cruisers most of the time. They do light cruisers and escorts. And the big reason for this is because, well, first of all, a little bit of finagling by the Skywatch has made the Zektek sector lean this way, simply because the Skywatch knows that as a chapter of Space Marines, they can't really have their own navy per se, but they do have their own escort fleets. Hint, hint, hint. So, by making sure that the Zektek sector can resupply their escort fleets by producing escorts and light cruisers, which are the few things that Space Marines are really allowed to have in abundance when it comes to fleets, they have ensured that they can treat themselves more and more like an independent military with its own navy, and that can be resupplied in this extremely unstable and often cut off sector. But that's really like like if you were going to ascribe percentages, that's like a 20% reason. The biggest reason is just because the Zektek sector was so devastated during the War of the Beast that it has been very slow to get back up on its feet. And most of the facilities and shipyards that would have been used to build the enormous ships are simply not available any longer. So that's kind of why in the Zektek fleet you will find that the larger ships are all very old. You even have a hefty number of Grand Cruisers floating around in the Zektek sector fleet, which, by the way, all of this is in my discussions tab in YouTube. So if you guys want to see some cool information, just go ahead and head into the discussions tab, and you'll see some of the stuff and little hints I've laid out for you guys. But aside from that, all you really need to understand about that is that they have some Grand Cruisers, they have some old ships, they even have one ironclad that is from the Great Crusade. that is still barely just puttering around with the rest of the fleet, with its enormous guns still sort of operational. That's the older ships. I mean, that's the larger ships. That's what I mean to say. That's the larger ships. The younger ships actually tend to be a bit more new and renovated. The cruisers, although there are several older cruisers, several of those cruisers have been able to be retrofitted because of the facilities, and they have also been maintained a little bit better. So cruisers and escorts tend to be, a bit more on the up and up in the Zectic sector. They're more modernized, they're better maintained, but they don't have the crazy old stuff like the bigger ships do. And some of the bigger ships have some really crazy cool old weapons, like some Godsbane lances, batteries, and stuff like that. So there you go. Now, the last thing I'll talk about here is just a little bit of a difference in design philosophy between the Star Wars universe and the Warhammer 40k universe, and in building material that really needs to be remarked on. So obviously, in 40k, ramming is a big thing, and Imperial ships ram a lot. And the Imperial Navy in the Warhammer 40k universe is caught in this very weird place where they have to be a lot more tactical than you might think. Because, the Imperial Navy is neither more numerous than their most numerous enemies, which is to say that they can be easily outnumbered by Orc ships and can be easily outnumbered by Tyranid ships, but they are not higher quality than Eldar, Dark Eldar, and even Tau ships if you look at certain metrics, which means that they don't have the best ships and they don't have the most ships. They just have some really weird ships. So one of the things their ships can do is they can fight at all ranges. They have very long range, they have good mid-range, and if you get too close, blam, they'll ram into you. How do they do that? How can they survive doing that? Well, it is implied that there are some sort of shock absorbers or something inside the ships that help them absorb it when they ram correctly, but that's not the biggest part. The biggest part that allows 40k ships to do these insane rams is that they're made out of adamantine. Most, if not all, 40k ships made by the Imperium have some element of adamantine in their skeleton, in the husk of the ship itself. These things are. It's hard for me to describe to you how incredibly difficult it is to destroy adamantine. There's been, like, I don't remember where I read this, but I'm sure that there's been at least one lore accounting where a ship has essentially flown through a star by accident, and the crew died, and all the ship systems were burnt out, but the adamantine shell of the ship was so resilient it basically eventually made it out the other side, and there it was, and it was grabbed and retrofitted, and they scraped out all the corpses and the junk components and replaced it with new stuff, and that ship went back out eventually. That's how hardcore we're talking. Like, imagine if you had an entire, enormous, larger than an Imperial Star Destroyer battleship, like a whole army of these things, made out of Beskar Gam. Because that is basically what adamantine is. Adamantine is essentially Beskar Gam that the Imperium has learned how to artificially produce. Which, by the way, this is not easy for the Imperium to do. Nobody knows how to do this. There are some STCs that automatically replicate the machinery that do this, but they don't do it well. The machinery doesn't work well. Nobody knows how to fix it. Nobody knows how it works, but it produces adamantine for them if they just put in the right stuff. And they think that they're doing it right, but who knows if they're even doing it right or not. So that's how tough Imperial ships are. So, for example, last time we had Captain Spike's remark on how their ships are so large that he doesn't even know where he should be shooting them. He's actually going to learn that that's not really what's happening. His ships, it's not that he doesn't know where to shoot them. He's a good captain, and he does know where to shoot them. He's just being frustrated by watching the ships not fall apart the way he's used to seeing them fall apart. And the big reason is because look at how Star Wars ships are built. They're not built out of anything even approaching the durability of the raw materials of the warp-capable craft in Warhammer 40k. And a great example of that is when you see in Rogue One, the Alliance uses a Hammerhead frigate to cause one Star Destroyer to run into another Star Destroyer. Now, this is one Star Destroyer swinging into another Star Destroyer, being thrown that way on the power of the engines of this one much smaller ship. And one Star Destroyer has no shields or anything, and is totally unpowered, and it's just floating dead in space. And using it, they basically completely slice the other Star Destroyer in half and destroy both ships very efficiently. I mean, I can't even tell you how many people died. Those two ships crashed into each other. The kill count for each of those guys inside of that little frigate that managed to do that is absolutely catastrophically enormous. Two capital ships done in just like that. Oh, the point is this. When you watch that scene, you'll see how those ships are just not meant for that. Like, the shields on the fully operational Imperial Star Destroyer were completely overcome by the inert mass of the other Star Destroyer. They are just not meant to absorb things like that. They're just not meant to ram, and they're not expecting to be rammed. Remember that, because I keep doing these battle simulations in my mind, and what I keep seeing is that Star Wars ships, all of their power is in their shields. All of it. All of it. I mean, we have examples like General Grievous throwing a melee weapon, an electro staff, that we have actually seen hit and not kill people, like many times. It's not even supposed to be a directly lethal weapon. We see him take one of these things, and with his own raw strength, which I'm sure is tremendous, but give me a break here, he throws it through the window shield, like the view screen of his own Providence-class Star Dreadnought, and shatters it, and causes a breach into space through which he escapes to get away from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Whoa. Oh my god. That is an incredibly weak, glass. That's transparent steel. I'm sure it is. General Grievous can throw a pole of metal hard enough to break transparent steel. That tells you that if a starship crashed into it, that would be done. It would be it. I don't even know how General Trench survived those missiles exploding on the roof of his Providence class when Anakin pulled his stunt, because he's just a hard to kill. He's just hard to kill, man. That must be what it was, because let me tell you, it is an incredible thing to watch General Grievous do that. I mean, if you want something even more, the Executioner. I mean, Vader's flagship. My God, thank goodness that Darth Vader wasn't on it when the one starfighter with one pilot killed an entire city worth of Imperial personnel by suicide bombing with his starship the bridge of the Executioner. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. All I mean to say, and all I'm trying to point out by saying all this, is that Star Wars ships are very clearly all shield, no hull. There is obviously some hull, but that hull is like freaking tissue paper. It can be torn literally by an individual, not even with a starship. It can be destroyed by an individual. So whenever you see a ship getting rammed in this story, 9 times out of 9, I almost can't imagine a situation where this isn't going to happen. It's going to destroy the ship it's ramming, because that's how Star Wars ships react to ramming. They are just destroyed by it. I mean, you could literally destroy a Star Dreadnought, an Execution. You could literally destroy the Executioner by ramming into its bridge with a one-man starfighter. And that is canon. That is 100% hard canonical. All depicted on screen. All 100% happened just the way it happened. There you go. So just know that, yes, whenever a Star Wars ship that isn't made to be rammed is rammed by any Imperial ship of almost any size, that Imperial ship is going to plow into that thing in a way that is going to be extremely decisive. I mean, even if we're talking about the Executioner getting plowed into by an escort, which, just to remind you guys, escorts are like 2 kilometers long. They're like more than double the size of a Venator class, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure a Venator is short of 1 kilometer, which makes an average escort, twice the length of an average Venator. And I say average escort because you might be saying, hey, Venators are all the same length. Okay, yeah, they are, but escorts aren't. No Imperial ship is the same size as any other Imperial ship of its class. Imperial ships are a mess. They're all built by different planets with no real standardization, aside from like what the tech priests can manage to beat into each other, and that's all its own mess. So the whole point is just this. Even if you see something as enormous as a like 17-kilometer long Executioner class super Star Destroyer getting rammed into by a 2-kilometer long escort, that escort is going to go through that thing the way a bullet would go through you, unless there's something else going on, unless I have put something into the narrative to deflect away from that or to compensate for it. That is what we're talking about here. This is just, don't be surprised if you see that happen. And it does play really badly with the current like level of technology that the Republic is working with. Their blasters are really short range, so they have to close range to get into effective combat range with the enemy. But the enemy can basically one-shot them if they can touch them. So it's definitely not going to be a very easy thing for the Republic to overcome. But if you are a Star Wars fan and you're wondering why this is and how it's unfair, know this. This is all perfectly accounted for in the Star Wars lore. Yes, this is not stagnation. This is actually extremely intentional. Star Wars is engaged right now, as far as warfare is concerned, in the same weird nonsense that like the British Empire and France and Spain and all those musket wielders way back then were engaged in, where people would stand in a straight line with the officers standing off to one side and fire into each other just like that, instead of use guerrilla tactics and more dynamic tactics. Star Wars has been engaged in doing this for the good of the galaxy, and honestly, it's good on them. They have no way of knowing that this is going to happen, so they have no way of knowing that it would backfire. But after the Treaty of Ruusan, which is the treaty that was signed by the Republic and the Jedi after the last big Sith War, for the last at least a few thousand years, I want to say, the Republic and the Jedi, and just in general everything that's been forced to interact with them and trade, has been forced to adhere in some way to the Treaty of Ruusan, which greatly reduces the capacity for warships to have weapons, the capacity for Jedi to wear armor, just a lot of different things. And honestly, the things that we're exposed to in the lore that are covered under the Treaty of Ruusan are probably not all-encompassing. Like, these are just the things the writers thought of, like when they were writing it up as writers. But if we are trying to view the Treaty of Ruusan as a realistic thing, it probably also directly affected and impaired the development of newer blaster, more lethal blaster technologies. This is probably the exact reason why you see the Imperial stormtroopers and the clone troopers using these really weird blaster technology that is slow. It's as fast as a baseball pitch, like a really fast baseball pitch. You can see them. Every single round is effectively a tracer round. They're not silent. They don't have endless ammunition. They do have to be reloaded. They actually have to be reloaded with 2 different ammunitions. Power packs after 100 shots, and a Tabana gas after like 700 shots. And the Tabana gas is extremely explosive, so reloading it is extremely dangerous. And you're thinking, well, crap, man. I don't want to have a really dangerous explosive in my rifle that can just blow me and my entire squad up if it's shot the wrong way, or if I'm shot while reloading. Well, that's blaster technology for you. At the same time, look at the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian has a disintegrator rifle that, you can't see the shots. The shots are invisible. They're not silent when they hit, but I'm pretty sure they're silent leaving the barrel, which means that they're as good as silent for the shooter. And yeah, they take ammunition of some kind, but it clearly pays in for itself and how effective the weapon is. It even seems to ignore armor, at least to a certain degree. So that's a really interesting and potent weapons technology. You're like, hey, why doesn't everyone just switch over to using that? Treaty of Rusan. That's the reason why. And you might be like, oh, well, after the Treaty of Rusan is rescinded, which is going to happen eventually, right? Well, after that, everything goes, nope, I'm sorry, because unfortunately the Treaty of Rusan has been around for a few thousand years, and even when people decide that they're not going to obey it anymore, it's going to take them a long time to pick up from that, because there's a culture around that. And you might say, okay, well, now you're stretching it. Where's the evidence for that? The evidence is the Empire. And it's a very powerful piece of evidence, too, because the Empire is led by a Sith. And the Empire, despite basically just completely abandoning the Treaty of Rusan wholesale, still uses blaster technology. Still, I mean, and you can argue that they juiced up blaster technology by a lot, and they added a lot more to their ships, and there's just all this stuff. Oh, it's so good. That is probably the case. I would not be surprised and not at all resistant to the idea that a stormtroopers like E11, or whatever they're called, I'm sorry, I'm not super up to date on the blaster names, but that they're more powerful than what the clone troopers are rocking around with. And not just because clone troopers are trying to kill droids. I bet the technology is actually more potent. I really do. That being said, they're still using blasters. They're not using disintegrators. In fact, disintegrators are still illegal. Why are disintegrators illegal for the Empire to use? They like bodies that much? I don't know. The point is that the reason, at least so far as I can tell, it's culture. It's all culture. It's a cultural reason. Imperial admirals and Imperial generals find it distasteful. Moffs don't like it because it upsets populations. Planetary governors don't want to be producing those weapons. People don't like it. People don't want to talk about it. People don't want to be involved in it. It's a culture thing. And it's a culture thing born out of the history of this galaxy. And what does this history of this galaxy tell you? It tells you, hey man, before the Treaty of Rusan, there were armies of Jedi and Sith creating biological abominations in the form of like giant Sith worms and dragons and stuff, and they were burning planets, and the Mandalorians were going buck wild, and they had combat droids they would ride on all the way through the atmosphere before they dropped down on top of your house and ate your wife. The point is that a lot of people would probably see the galaxy as having been a freaking like roller coaster straight into self-destruction before the Treaty of Rusan was signed, and then suddenly the Jedi went from being literal warrior knights with literal knights armor to being like these chill dudes who wear robes and they're all about meditation, man. Oh yeah, we're peacekeepers now, man. Oh yeah, bruh. So most of the galaxy is really into that idea. Even when the Empire decided to break away from it wholesale, they couldn't break away from it wholesale, which is shown super evidently in the fact that all that technology is still carried directly over. And I'm sure that a part of that is also sort of like corporate nepotism. The blaster technologies are sort of like the oil companies. They're not going to suddenly go over and start manufacturing bullets or just roll over and die to the bullet companies. They're going to fight really hard and be corrupt and be everything they can be to keep producing blasters and keep selling blaster weapons and make sure that everybody in every part of the galaxy from every side is still using blaster technology. I'm sure that's also a part of it. But I don't think it's a huge part of it. I mean, I do think it's a huge part of it. I don't think it's the biggest part of it. I think that's maybe a 40% issue, and the other thing would be like a 56% issue, and everything else just sort of filters into that little last chunk. I'm sorry. Rambling again. Lost where I was at. But yeah, so right. The weapons technologies and the stagnation of of weapons development in the Republic. So if you were to look at the Treaty of Rusan like a realistic treaty, it probably impaired all of these things. It probably busted down all of these things. So the Republic is simply not like a galaxy, like the Star Wars galaxy rather, not the Republic, but the Star Wars galaxy by and large is not a galaxy that is prepared to handle serious problems like this. This is almost the reason they need the Jedi, is to make up the slack for this. That being said, when it comes to developing weapons and new technologies, people like to crap on the Star Wars universe. How long did it take them to build the Death Star? How long did it take them to build the second Death Star? How long did it take a tiny military enclave with extremely limited resources to build Starkiller Base? Watch out. Put the Star Wars galaxy under a lot of pressure, and it begins to produce some pretty crazy answers to that pressure. So, all of this to say, don't count Star Wars out, but do know this. Realistically speaking, Star Wars is starting much worse off than just hobbled. And you're going to see that sort of play out, and I'm going to try to make it as entertaining as I can and see if I can't pull out a few twists that you may not see coming. But when you have this is what I was trying to get to. So remember the design philosophy behind the Imperial Star Destroyer. The whole idea behind an Imperial Star Destroyer is that you could have one or two ships go to a system and lock down that system, and that would be all that you need. That's a cool idea. An escort from the Imperium of Man does that, and it does it better and more completely than a Star Destroyer would. So, and I say this and I emphasize it because the name of an escort is an escort. So in your mind, it's not going to resonate as like, oh, well, this is bigger than a Star Destroyer. It is. An escort is much, much larger than a Star Destroyer. A cruiser is much larger than an escort. A battleship is much larger than a cruiser. So you see what I'm saying here. Just one escort would be analogous to at least one Star Destroyer being in system. And that is sort of the benchmark. God, see, I ramble so much. I'm very sorry, guys. I can't help but ramble. But this is kind of the point I was trying to get to when I began talking about the differences between the way that ships are in the 40K universe and the Star Wars universe. To say that, so understand that when you have an escort ship in system for the Imperium of Man, that is equivalent to having a Star Destroyer in system for the Galactic Empire. Maybe even it's like definitely even a bit chunkier, a bit juicier, because the escort is going to be tougher, like physically tougher, and probably have bigger, stronger guns, just not as many of them, than the Star Destroyer would. The biggest advantage the Star Destroyer would have over the escort is a hilarious one. The Star Destroyer can launch fighter craft. Most escorts don't have those facilities. Very, very quick recap on that if you're a Star Wars person. In the Imperium, there was a minor rebellion among the Navy that centered around these two ship designs, and one was one came out as the quote-unquote loyalist ship design, and one came out as the not loyalist ship design. And what are these two ship designs? Carrier versus not carrier, basically. And not carriers were the loyalist ones, and so now most Imperial fleets are very loath to carry a bunch of carriers with them. And that makes it so that most escorts don't have that capacity. It usually has to be much larger ships. So then, in any case, escorts don't have TIE fighters. That being said, TIE fighters. I mean, it's not very good when I have to look at your ship and I say, well, at least you have TIE fighters. I mean, that's not going to save you in a one-on-one fight with one of these things. So, in any case, I think that you see what I'm trying to say. And with that, I will go ahead and put down my rambling right here. Thank you again for hanging out with me and listening to my spiel. Please go down in the comments and let me know about basically anything, but let me know about what topics you would like me to cover in these little talks after the videos. I'm really down to just talk about anything, but I definitely want to talk about whatever you guys are interested in hearing about. And if you have any questions, ask them. If you have a request for me to just chew on a topic or to give my opinion on something, go ahead. I'll be reading all your comments. I'm pretty sure you guys know that I go through those every day. And yeah, until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.